Mr. Robertson, I must say, my two daughters are truly exceptional, Walter Brooks said, leaning forward with a tone thick with boastfulness. They're a perfect match for your grandsons. Rest assured, once these four are married, you'll see this was the absolute right decision. A familiar voice echoed in her ears. Ashlyn Brooks's eyes snapped open as she dragged in a sharp, ragged breath. Hadn't she just fallen to her death from an 18-story balcony? How could she be back in the Brooks residence? The living room was immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows gleamed, sunlight streamed through the glass dome overhead, and a faint floral scent drifted through the air. Slowly, the memories came rushing back. This was the year Arthur Robertson, patriarch of the Robertson family, had come to formally propose a union between their two houses. This was the year she had chosen Simon Robertson, the second son, the man who would become the architect of her misery, the beginning of the nightmare that ended in her death. Had she been reborn? If fate was truly giving her a second chance, she refused to make the same mistakes. Everyone who had wronged her would pay in blood. The Robertson family controlled a vast business empire that dominated the city, Ariden. Marrying into their ranks was a dream countless other families could only aspire to. And yet, the Robertsons had chosen the Brooks family. The reason traced back decades to a bond forged between their grandfathers, long before either family had risen to prominence. Ashlyn's grandfather had once saved Arthur Robertson's life, a debt that led to an old-fashioned promise to one day join their families through marriage. Now that the grandchildren were of age, Arthur felt honor-bound to see that promise through, whether the unions actually happened or not. The Brooks family business had been in decline for years. The fact that the Robertsons still intended to honor that long-ago pledge was almost too good to be true. They could barely contain their glee. How could they possibly refuse? A shadow passed through Ashlyn's eyes. In her last life, her dear sister Valerie Brooks had rushed to stake her claim before Ashlyn could, choosing Dylan Robertson, the eldest son, because Dylan was the sole heir to the Robertson business empire. Marrying him guaranteed a life of unimaginable luxury and prestige. Except, Dylan had already given his heart to someone else. This marriage alliance was nothing more than him bowing to his family's relentless pressure. After the wedding, Dylan kept Valerie at arm's length. In public, they played the part of a perfect, polished couple. In private, they led entirely separate lives. How could a woman as spoiled and willful as Valerie tolerate being outshone? She schemed relentlessly against the woman Dylan loved, her jealousy eventually consuming her to the point of orchestrating Dylan's own downfall, and Valerie, she didn't fare much better. Her story ended in a pool of her own blood, dying alone in childbirth. As for Ashlyn, her gaze slowly lifted and met Simon's. A flicker of surprise crossed his features before his expression softened into a warm, charming smile. With his gentle demeanor, soft voice, and carefully cultivated sensitivity, he was the very picture of a cultured young man, the sort who seemed utterly incapable of harm. A violent shudder tore through Ashlyn. No one knew better than she did what kind of monster hid just beneath that gentle face. The memories from her past life crashed over her, draining the color from her cheeks. Instinctively, she tore her gaze away. Since you're also in favor of this, Mr. Brooks, why don't we let the girls decide for themselves who they'd like to marry? Arthur Robertson's voice was warm and genial. I know arranged marriages are outdated, he continued, but people in our position must be cautious. The world is full of men looking to take advantage of young women from good families. Exactly. Walter agreed heartily. Ashlyn lowered her gaze. She pressed her thumbnail hard into the soft flesh between her thumb and forefinger, the sharp sting jolting her back to a state of razor-sharp clarity. This alliance was inevitable. Neither she nor Valerie truly had a choice. Dad, Valerie burst out suddenly. I choose Simon. Ashlyn froze. Why was Valerie's choice completely different from her past life? Beside Valerie, Laura Brooks, Ashlyn's stepmother, shot her daughter a fierce glare, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. Think about what you're doing. Dylan was the one inheriting the entire Robertson empire. As for Simon, he was nothing but a researcher buried in a lab. What possible future could Valerie have with him? I've made my choice. Simon. Valerie rose to her feet, flashing a brilliant, confident smile in his direction. Simon returned the smile with practiced ease. But as his gaze swept past Ashlyn, it lingered for a fraction of a second before moving on. Walter frowned slightly. He clearly disapproved of Valerie's decision, but a lifetime of indulging her every whim kept him from speaking up. "And you, Ashlyn?" he asked. Ashlyn drew a slow, deep breath. She lifted her gaze and pointed directly at Dylan. Dylan barely glanced up. His expression remained cold, unreadable. He gave her a single, indifferent look before turning away. As she lowered her hand, she felt another gaze on her from the side, amused, appraising. A cold dread washed over her, purely reflexive. Ashlyn swallowed hard. She didn't register much of what was said after that. Her mind was reeling, still caught in the aftershock of what had just happened. She was half convinced this second chance was nothing but a fever dream. But the sting in her palm throbbed steadily, stubbornly real. That small, sharp pain was the only thing anchoring her to this moment. Once the formalities concluded, they all moved to the dining room. The moment the meal ended, the Robertson family took their leave. Simon's eyes lingered on them as he bid the family goodbye in his soft, low voice. Dylan, on the other hand, didn't spare either of the Brooks sisters a single glance. He simply turned and left. Only when Simon was finally gone did Ashlyn allow herself a deep, shuddering breath of relief. She rose and headed wordlessly to her room. Passing by the study, she heard the low, urgent murmur of voices from inside. "Are you insane? Choosing Simon?" Laura's voice was sharp with disbelief. "As long as Dylan is alive, Simon will never be the Robertson heir." That much was true. Valerie was Ashlyn's half-sister. Ashlyn's own mother had been dead barely a year before their father remarried, bringing Laura and her daughter into their home. It was obvious he had been unfaithful long before Ashlyn's mother passed. For years, Ashlyn had lived like a stranger in her own house. "Mom, you just don't get it." Valerie's voice cut through the door, sharp and impatient. "Dylan's already in love with someone else. This whole marriage proposal is just him giving in to family pressure. A man like that. He'd never even look at me, no matter how hard I tried. But by choosing Simon, you're just handing the position of the heir's wife straight to Ashlyn." Laura snapped. Valerie let out a sharp, humorless laugh. She's not worthy, and no one will ever measure up to the woman in Dylan's heart. Even if Ashlyn marries him, with that stiff, dull personality of hers, he'll never give her the time of day. Simon, though, he's different. He's attentive, gentle, and fiercely loyal once he commits. Her voice dropped, laced with a dark, conspiratorial certainty. Besides, the question of who will inherit the Robertson empire is far from settled. Ashlyn lowered her eyes and pushed open the door to her own room. She leaned back against it, raising a hand to stare at her wrist. The skin was smooth, unblemished. Not like in her last life, where an ugly, brutal scar had marred that very spot. Valerie believed Simon was loyal and devoted. She was wrong. The real Simon was cruel, vicious, and a master of psychological torture. In her last life, he had clawed his way to the top by using her, stepping on her back and draining the life from her until she was nothing more than the bloody foundation for his success. But in this life, she swore with cold, absolute certainty. She would never let that happen again. It was a customary visit. The next morning, Ashlyn and Valerie arrived at the Robertson residence, bringing a carefully chosen gift for Mr. and Mrs. Robertson. Throughout the meal, the conversation was a study in faultless decorum. Laughter was polite and perfectly timed, compliments were measured, and not a single word fell out of place. The lunch concluded smoothly. Sylvia Robertson smiled warmly. "You two are sweet girls. There's no need to linger with us. Why not take the afternoon to yourselves? You're all young after all." The others murmured their agreement, and Ashlyn rose with them. Within moments, the dining room had cleared out. "Ashlyn." A low voice cut through the quiet. Dylan was suddenly beside her, his expression detached. "Come with me." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away. Ashlyn had no choice but to hurry after him. They made their way to the study on the upper floor. Dylan closed the door behind them with a casual flick of his wrist. The latch clicked softly into place. But the quiet sound sent a jolt of ice through Ashlyn, dragging her back into the horror of her past life. Whenever Simon deemed her disobedient, his mask of civility would vanish. He would drag her into a room, unbuckle his belt, and lash out. Each strike was a lesson in pain, meant to teach her fear and submission. Every blow brought a searing, unforgettable agony. Ashlyn flinched instinctively, taking a sharp step back. Dylan noticed her reaction and paused, maintaining a careful distance. "Don't worry," he said, his voice even. "I won't lay a finger on you." Some conversations are simply better held behind closed doors. Ashlyn forced herself to stand her ground, her hand clenching into a fist. Understood. The terror Simon had instilled in her was still too close to the surface. Studying herself, Ashlyn studied Dylan. In her previous life, she had seen him only twice. Once during the engagement negotiations between their families, and a second time after the car accident that had left him disfigured, wheelchair-bound, and utterly broken. Even then, she had only glimpsed him from a distance. Compared to the humiliated man she remembered, the Dylan standing before her now was untouched by tragedy. He embodied the ruthless, decisive reputation that preceded him in the business world. He stood nearly 6'3", with slick-back hair and a dark dress shirt tucked into tailored slacks. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing powerful, corded forearms. "What is it?" Ashlyn asked, lowering her gaze. A chilling thought struck her. If a man this powerful ever decided to hurt her, she wouldn't stand a chance. Dylan walked to the desk, pulled out a document, and tossed it down in front of her. "Let me be clear. I've agreed to this marriage, but there is no affection between us." Ashlyn already knew he had someone else. "I imagine you have your own reasons for agreeing to this," he continued. "Circumstances you couldn't control." He slid the document closer to her. "So, until this marriage is dissolved, I expect you to abide by these terms in public. We will act like a loving couple in private. I will not touch you or interfere in your life. I expect the same from you." Ashlyn looked up, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Really?" Her reaction was decidedly odd. Dylan arched a brow. "You seem rather eager." "Not at all." Ashlyn bit her lip, quickly picking up the document and scanning it with care. The terms were fair and straightforward, mostly standard post-marital considerations. She found nothing objectionable. Picking up a pen, she moved to sign, then stopped just before the nib touched the paper. "What is it?" Dylan frowned. "Is something unclear?" Ashlyn met his gaze. "Just to be clear, Dylan, my research, you won't interfere with that either, will you?" A corner of Dylan's mouth twitched. "Correct. Once we've played our public roles, our private lives are our own." Just then, a phone rang. Dylan answered it, his voice instantly losing its hard edge, replaced by a surprising gentleness. "Don't worry, I'll send someone over now, and I'm just finishing up here. I'll head away soon, okay?" The transformation was startling. The cold, detached man from moments ago was gone, replaced by someone warm and reassuring. Whoever was on the other end of the line clearly meant the world to him. For Ashlyn, this was all the confirmation she needed. A wave of relief washed over her, and with a decisive flick of her wrist, she signed her name on the bottom line. Dylan hung up, turned, and saw the signed document. He gave a slight nod. "Thank you." The agreement was in duplicate. She took her copy. With their business concluded, Dylan tucked his copy away and opened the door, gesturing for her to exit. He was polite, efficient, and clearly in a hurry to leave. Stepping out of the study, she saw no sign of Simon or Valerie. Dylan noted, "It seems your sister and Simon have already left. How are you getting home? I can have a car sent around." He maintained an impeccable, courteous distance. He wasn't being cruel, just clear about their boundaries. Ashlyn felt a growing sense of ease. After the years of mental manipulation, gaslighting, and physical abuse she had endured from Simon, a man like Dylan, cold but direct, felt like a lifeline. With this arrangement, she could finally break free from the Brooks family and immerse herself completely in her research. And when the time came, divorcing him would be simple. She would finally be free to live on her own terms. That won't be necessary. Ashlyn respected the boundary he'd drawn. "I'll call a taxi." "Thank you." Dylan gave a distant nod and walked away without another word. Ashlyn politely declined the Robertson family butler's offer of a car and made her way out on foot. As she passed the garden, she heard voices drifting from within. "Valerie, you can rest assured. I'm not like my brother. His marriage is just a formality to satisfy the family, but my feelings for you are real." It was Simon's voice. Ashlyn froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her fear of Simon was that absolute. She stood rigid, not daring to move. Through a gap in the foliage, she could see Simon fastening a necklace around Valerie's throat, his expression impossibly tender. "Let me put it on for you." Valerie tilted her head, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Yes." With her back to him, she missed the way his tender expression hardened into something cold and calculating. Valerie might be the youngest of the Brooks daughters, but she was currently their father's favorite and stood to inherit a controlling share of the family enterprise. Securing her would make the Brooks family a powerful ally in his own fight for the Robertson inheritance. As for Ashlyn, she was just a bookworm who only knew how to hide in her research. Valerie touched the necklace at her throat, a sweet, triumphant smile playing on her lips. In her previous life, she had married Dylan full of hope, believing she could one day win his heart. But all she had gotten was a cold contract. That one mistake had led to everything falling apart, and ultimately she had died in childbirth. So this time, she chose Simon, the gentlest of them. At the wedding, she would outshine Ashlyn completely. "It's getting late," Simon said, his gentle smile returning as he faced Valerie again. "Let me take you home." "All right." Valerie took his hand, her grip firm and eager. The two of them left by another path. Hidden in the shadows, Ashlyn felt her knees nearly buckle. She steadied herself against a nearby stone. She took a moment to collect herself before heading for the gate, just in time to see Simon opening the car door for Valerie before they both climbed inside. Through the window, Valerie's gaze found Ashlyn. She shot her a smug, challenging look, her lips curving into a triumphant smile. She believed that by now, Ashlyn probably had her contract. This time, Ashlyn won't be the lucky one. The car drove off. But as it disappeared, Ashlyn felt nothing but profound relief. In this life, she would never have to be near Simon again. The wedding day was fast approaching. After the engagement, Valerie and Simon were inseparable, lost in a whirlwind of romantic dates and spontaneous weekends away. Ashlyn, however, was a world apart. Since her discussion with Dylan in his study, they hadn't been in contact. She had thrown herself completely into her research projects. The Robertson and Brooks families had agreed on a joint ceremony. On the eve of the wedding, Sean Harvey, Dylan's assistant, arrived with a gown and a selection of jewelry. Just as Dylan had promised, he was keeping up appearances, granting her all the status and respect that came with her position. "Miss Brooks, this is a French haute couture gown," Sean said, his tone professionally respectful. "Mr. Robertson commissioned it 3 months ago." He gestured to the accessories. "And the jewelry is set with an exceptionally rare blue diamond. Mr. Robertson flew to Italy personally to have it designed by an atelier renowned for its traditional craftsmanship." The gown and necklace were both breathtaking. Ashlyn's expression, however, remained perfectly composed. She simply offered a polite, "Thank you." Sean's words were likely embellished, but Dylan's intent was clear. As long as she upheld her end of their agreement, he would treat her fairly. As Sean left, Ashlyn turned and saw Valerie standing in the living room. "Feeling important, are you?" Valerie's voice was laced with sarcasm. Her eyes glinted with bitter resentment. Marrying the future heir to the Robertson empire certainly changes things. Knowing what Valerie had done in her last life, Ashlyn had no desire to get tangled up with such a petty schemer. She simply said, "You and Simon clearly care for each other. I'm sure he won't neglect you. That gown and jewelry from him are chosen with care." Ashlyn's mind drifted back. And her last life. Simon had worn a meticulously crafted mask, and he hadn't let it slip until 3 months after their wedding. The gown and jewelry he'd prepared for her back then hadn't been on the same level as what Dylan was providing now, but they were far from shabby. What she didn't realize was that her calm words had struck a nerve. Simon had specifically told Valerie that with both ceremonies happening together and Dylan being the official heir, it wouldn't do for their own arrangements to outshine his brothers. The gown and jewels Simon had provided for her, though high quality, seemed like pale imitations compared to what Ashlyn now possessed. Feeling smug, Valerie sneered, a sinister glint in her eyes. "You won't be for long." She had destroyed Dylan once before. In her last life, she had ruined him, leaving him scarred and confined to a wheelchair. This time would be no different. As long as Simon loved her, she could easily push him into the heir's position. Ashlyn only nodded, offering no further comment as she brushed past her. At 4 o'clock the next morning, the Robertson family's glam team arrived, and the two brides began their makeup in separate rooms. Ashlyn hadn't slept much, having stayed up late reviewing research materials. Even now, a complex data set was still running through her mind. "Strange," the makeup artist murmured, frowning at a lipstick. "This one looks off. Maybe it's expired." "And no, I don't think so," the assistant stammered, her voice trembling slightly. "That's just how this brand is. We're short on time. Let's just use another one for Miss Brooks." The makeup artist shrugged, set the odd lipstick aside, and picked up a different one to start on Ashlyn's lips. "Wait." Ashlyn held up a hand. Her tone was polite, but it left no room for argument. "May I see that lipstick?" She shot the assistant a sharp glance, catching the flicker of panic that crossed the young woman's face. The makeup artist handed it over without a second thought. "The texture is weird, but that might just be their signature formula. Good thing we have backups." "Exactly." The assistant jumped in a little too eagerly. "We can just keep this one aside. If your makeup smudges during the ceremony, we can use it for a touch-up." Ashlyn lowered her head, opened the tube, and inspected it closely. She then brought it to her nose and inhaled softly. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. Someone had mixed peanut powder into the lipstick, and Ashlyn was deathly allergic to peanuts. She didn't need to guess who was behind it. Only one person would pull such a vicious, underhanded stunt. After all, in her previous life, Valerie had an entire arsenal of similarly twisted tricks. Ashlyn handed the lipstick back with a serene smile and beckoned the makeup artist closer. When the artist leaned in, Ashlyn whispered something in her ear. The assistant couldn't hear a word, her anxiety spiking as she watched them. A steely resolve replaced the confusion in the artist's eyes. She gave a short, determined nod. Understood. Once the makeup was done, the maid of honor arrived. Ashlyn had only one bridesmaid, Paige Shaw, her ride-or-die best friend since childhood. Paige walked in and gave her a mischievous wink. She leaned close and whispered, "The mission you gave me is all set, but how did you know Kathleen Dunn would cause a scene? Are you sure she's going to show up?" Kathleen was the woman Dylan had loved from afar. In Ashlyn's last life, Valerie had stopped at nothing to target Kathleen in her obsessive quest to win Dylan's affection. Ultimately, Valerie's scheming had become so depraved that she conspired with outsiders, setting a trap that betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. It left him permanently scarred and confined to a wheelchair, a shadow of his former self. And Kathleen, the woman Dylan had sworn to protect, had stayed by his side for only 3 months. Once she realized he was of no more use to her, she walked away without a backward glance. "I don't know for sure," Ashlyn said with a gentle smile. "Call it a precaution." Because at the wedding in her previous life, Kathleen had indeed appeared and created a massive, humiliating scene for Valerie. Paige nodded. "Fair enough. I know your marriage is just a contract, and you have no intention of getting between them, but Kathleen doesn't know that. A little extra caution never hurts." On this, Ashlyn had never hidden the truth from Paige. How could she? In her last life, Paige had died trying to rescue Ashlyn from Simon's clutches. This time, she would protect Paige with everything she had. The grooms arrived to pick up their brides. Skipping the drawn-out formalities, the group soon reached the ceremony venue. The 4 of them stood before the grand doors of the hall. Ashlyn and Dylan were side by side in the front, with Valerie and Simon positioned directly behind them. The doors swung open. Applause erupted from the crowd. With practiced chivalry, Dylan offered his arm. Ashlyn placed her hand on it with a polite smile, and they began their walk down the aisle. To the guests, they were a strikingly handsome couple, the very picture of perfection. Valerie followed right behind them. Just before stepping forward, she had quickly reapplied her lipstick, checking her reflection to ensure she was flawless. Satisfied, she looped her arm intimately through Simon's and took her place. But the moment she stepped into the spotlight, an abrupt, unnatural hush fell over the crowd. Her heart plummeted. Something was wrong. A burning, stinging sensation was spreading from her lips across her cheeks. In a panic, she turned to Simon, her voice trembling. "Simon, what's happening? Is there something on my face?" "It's nothing," he said flatly. His brow furrowed, more from annoyance than concern. "Just a small allergic reaction. Nothing serious. I'll have someone bring you some cream." Valerie froze. An allergy? How could that be? It was Ashlyn who was supposed to be having this reaction. A venomous hatred blazed in her eyes as she stared at Ashlyn's back. Ashlyn. It had to be her. She must have done something to the lipstick. That wretched, scheming woman. When had she become so damn cunning?